Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Karen Brune. I'm one of the Provost Teaching Fellows, and as it happens, there are 12 of us, and I think 11 of us are participating today, and I want to briefly introduce them so that you can approach any or all of us, afterwards or really any time. We're supposed to be a resource for the campus to help promote excellent teaching. So as I said, I'm Karen Brune. My co-presenter is Lily Savigny. On the downtown campus, we have Bobby Lackford and Eric Johnson. On the Holly campus, we have Jean Stutz. And on the West campus, we have Pam Marshall, Bertha Mannigan, and also Dwayne Rowan. So we're offering a series of workshops. This one, of course, is on facilitating small discussion. And we're going to have a brief presentation. We're hoping it's 20 minutes about. We'll have a time for cross-campus questions so that everybody can hear the questions. And then we'll shut down the technology and we'll have discussion and interaction that is campus-specific. Okay? So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lily Savigny.
Thank you, Karen. And again, we'll have our email addresses up here. We can give you our card if you would like the slides later. I know Bobby at the downtown site made some of these, so we can share these with you.
We did not.
So we have, from the Provost Teaching Fellows, we have, trying to eat her lunch is our Vice Provost, Deb Clark, who is who spearheaded all of this. Thank you, Deb. We have Steve Stumkin, Max Underwood, Tamiko Azuma. I think that's it for our teaching fellows. And then we have some of our first-year faculty here as well. So we wanted to start out thinking about why you want to use discussion. And again, as Karen said, we'll have a few minutes of a presentation and we'll have a lot of action for you all as well. So the benefits are that it's active learning, and we all want that. It can help students master and take ownership of the material rather than feeling that the content is all from the book or from you. They generate a lot of the thinking and they generate a lot of that mastery of the material. For many of us, the students need the skill set of being able to present their ideas cogently or discuss in teams because they'll be doing this on the job or in their future graduate studies or as faculty. So it does offer them a chance, not just discussion because they like it, but discussion as a skill set. The other is it helps us as instructors. So we can quickly find gaps and misunderstandings rather than waiting till the first exam or the midterm. We can see quickly, we can hear if there is a lot of questioning about the content or misunderstanding of the content. From the research, by the way, we have 4 slides at the end which we will not show, which are more citations to the research if you're interested in this. But basically, a lot of the research is on active learning techniques, promoting active learning. For some classes, the importance of community, particularly if it's online, and a lot of techniques for classroom assessment techniques that are formal or informal, and a lot of that involves discussion. So there's a lot coming out of the research on active learning. So again, we don't want that, we want the action. So
I'm going to talk a little bit about how we should set the parameters for discussion and what kind of format you should use. Because there's more than one, and you should probably base the format of your discussion on what you want your students to learn. One of the first things that we have found works really well is to involve your students in setting up ground rules for discussion. Our slide says your first discussion should be about discussion. Maybe your third or fourth discussion should be about discussion, because sometimes if the students have had an opportunity to discuss as a group, they already have come up with things that they think work or don't work. But invest your students in the process. They need to understand that they have something to say about this and that they can make the experience better and, of course, more educational. So here are some of the things that you need to think about when you're setting up a group discussion. Should students raise hands? or should you just try and have an organic discussion? Should students call on one another, or should the discussion always go through you? We've all probably had the experience where we have really bright and engaged students, but they want to do all the talking. So do you want to set a limit on how many times one person can speak? And the things, some of the things that will affect how you make your ground rules is, number one, the number of students. If you have 10 students, they probably don't have to raise their hands. If you have 25, maybe they do, to give everybody an equal opportunity to participate. And also the level of knowledge. Are these beginning students who you're really going to have to guide through information even as they discuss? Or is this a graduate level or upper level course where you're not so concerned with them getting new information as you are with their learning how to share their assessment and their analysis of it? Very important question, and if you're going to have discussion, is how do I ensure that the students treat each other with respect? And a lot of this is self-explanatory. You probably already know it. But the students want to hear it. The students want to know that you've thought about their safety, their emotional safety. So it's an important discussion to have with the students. We recommend that you include your what we call non-negotiables in your expectations regarding respect and anonymity. Again, probably common sense, but for example, I really don't like my students to swear. And some people don't care, and I do. So I say that at the beginning, no swearing. So then if a student swears, I don't call them out on a personal level, like, you bad person, how dare you use that dirty language. I just remind them that in this class, the rules are no swearing. Make sure the students understand that they have the right to express their opinions without interruption, be listened to respectfully. They have the right to express disagreement, and they are to be afforded the same respect. Again, this is nothing that you don't know and they don't know, but it's important to say it. Robust discussion always involves a critique of ideas. Make sure that you distinguish between critiquing ideas and an ad hominem attack. Help students understand that difference between attacking the idea and attacking the person. What is said in the classroom stays in the classroom. That's really important, and that's important for us as teachers to respect too. Sometimes we like to tell tales from our classroom, and we really should respect our students' privacy. If a student reveals personal information, that information should not only not be made public, of course, but should also not be the topic of other conversations. So once you have this conversation with your students, you've decided, is it okay to raise hands? Does the discussion always have to go through the professor? Would you prefer that students really guide it themselves? Then you say, how should I prepare to facilitate discussion? I know what the discussion is going to look like. And the basic rule is good discussion always begins with good questions from you and good questions from your students. And I'm going to let Willie talk a little more about that.
So again, the first question is, what are the goals? So why are you having a discussion? What's the purpose? For example, you might say, well, I want my students to explore the complexities of this text. Or you might say, I want them to articulate and defend their own positions on a topic and understand and appropriately respond to others' questions in this discussion. So you'll want to, as Karen said, craft questions that move the students toward that goal. So thinking about the student learning outcomes that are your goal and move the questions that direction. So you could prepare the questions, and all of us would do that. But we wanted to also mention to you that you can have a very, very lively discussion requiring students to submit their own discussion questions after they read. I've had experience where I have student moderators, for example, and the discussion becomes quite a bit livelier. They can eventually anticipate what I'm going to ask, but they can't anticipate what their colleagues might ask. And then instead of saying, what does Willie, the instructor, want, it becomes a true discussion. So encourage them to respond to their students' questions with questions of their own, if you like. So being prepared to compose follow-up questions on the fly, or you might be prepared to compose questions on the fly. And then another technique would be to have students spend the last 5 minutes of class writing down questions that weren't answered, and then spend the first 10 minutes of the next class answering those questions. Should I move it online?
Sure, go ahead.
So we designed this to be just about discussion, but we do have a little section on online discussion. So how many of you teach at times online courses or hybrid courses? I mean, that's a lot of you. Or, of course, even if you have a face-to-face class, you could be using Blackboard to host a discussion. So in terms of online, I've taught online really a long time, like 17 years. So in my experience, if you want the students to learn to work in groups, for example, if that's a skill that they should have, team-based learning or group learning on the job or in their next classes, then you want to support that with online discussion. Also, I find that in online classes, they don't feel part of the class. I've had really strange experiences at times with people saying, sort of feeling like they're alone and they post things in the middle of the night. Well, you don't want that. You want a community where they get the benefit of each other's knowledge as well. And in particular, to build that community. I have had students say, for example, that I've had them in face-to-face classes and online classes, and when I do a mid-semester course evaluation, they've said they feel more a part of the online class than when they're face-to-face because they get to talk more. The other thing it does is it allows students to have some reflection and some time. Many students, particularly international students, but also shy students or beginners in your field, they don't respond that well sometimes face-to-face, but they do when they have time to reflect and time to post online. Building that community reduces that feeling of anonymity in a large online class. It does ensure that every student can participate, not just the louder ones or the bolder ones. And that reflection that they can have over time can lead to more meaningful discussion. And not least, it does give you a record for reference for yourself and for the other students. In terms of online discussion, I did want to mention it can be content related, can be objective, long essay questions that people respond to or short, but it also can be very personal if you decide to do that. It's up to you how you want to handle the content-related discussions. You can use a discussion for general class Q&A. You can have an FAQ forum where first they should go and look for answers, for example, if you have a large class, and then they could email you. That might save you a little bit of time. I've also tried, they don't use it all that much, but you can use a social forum. For example, if you're in a field where there are a lot of events in Phoenix and you want students to know about it, they might know of events that you don't know about. Have a forum where they can share things that they may want to participate in, or even try, in the sort of olden days in online learning, we had cafes where people could sort of just talk. They're busy, so I don't find them using that too much, but the event types of things you should know about, they do use that. And of course, a discussion forum can be used for things that aren't technically discussion, like group work, problem solving, role plays, peer reviews can all be done within that discussion board. So even if you never have a discussion, but you want your students to give reviews of each other, that's a good format. One example, I taught a computer-based class. Actually, this was my doc student who did this one. She had students building ergonomic computer setups, and she had them doing that in groups and then sharing that in a discussion forum. And then a quick reminder, and that is that, of course, a discussion forum could be held within a different format, like a wiki. Just remember in online that there are a few challenges. They can't see each other's body language. You all know that from your emails. You don't have to raise your hands, but all of us have made mistakes by email that wouldn't have happened if we'd been talking to each other and facing each other. So there, again, as Karen mentioned, clear guidelines. And then the dark secret, of course, is that it's going to take time. It takes their time, so be careful how many discussions you have. Be careful about when you have, for example, you might say post by Wednesday, respond by Sunday. It will take a lot of time on their part, so give them enough points for it, to be blunt, and also recognize it will take quite a bit of time from you in the beginning. This is my secret, and that is that the first, in a semester class, first 3 weeks, maybe a week and a half in a 7.5-week course, you'll have to be there a lot. They want to know that you're seeing everything. And then you fade yourself out a little bit because you don't want them just answering you. You want them to have a discussion. I'm going to do a smaller picture.
We're rolling to a close. We just have a couple more things to say before we open it up for discussion. Small groups and team learning. A tried and true method to encourage discussion, no matter the size of the group, is to break it into smaller groups. That almost always works. I'm team teaching a class now with 10 students, and we routinely break them into small groups and then reconvene to the larger group because it's a different way for them to talk to one another. If groups are formed, here are some tips. Generally mix students of different ability levels. That raises all boats. And instead of having the strong students in one group and the weak students in another group, which might happen if you let them choose their own groups. There are advantages to letting them choose their own groups. They feel empowered. They get to work with people they know and feel comfortable with. It's your choice whether or not you do that, but I would say don't feel bad about deciding for yourself who the groups will be. They'll get over the fact that they didn't get to be with their best friend. 4 to 6 in a group is ideal, most studies tell us. Here's another thing. If you're going to have groups a lot, you should consider trying to keep the same groups so they don't have to reform and get to know one another all over again. It depends, I think, on the intensity of the work you're asking the group to do. If it's really, just discuss this paragraph and come back. Then there's an advantage to mixing the groups around, or mixing it up so that people get to know one another, get to know everybody in the class and feel more comfortable. Again, groups, as we talked about at the beginning that we would do as a class, groups should talk about their norms and procedures. It's not a bad idea maybe to ask your group of 4 to assign roles. You're going to be the record keeper, you're going to be the synthesizer, you're going to be the investigator, and you're going to be devil's advocate, or however you want to break it up. If you find that the students are kind of holding back, even in small groups, that can be an effective way to get them to talk to one another. There's research on team building and group learning that is available to you on one of our resource slides that we're not going to take time to discuss, but is available to you. So, in conclusion, tips and best practices that we think are helpful. Set the rules of engagement and expectations in concert with your students. Model the discussion forum behavior you desire from students. I think we don't realize sometimes what an effective tool this can be. They want to know how it's done. We know what we want, so model it for them. Be reflective, ask questions, question yourself, show them what you want from them. Deal with disparaging or offensive remarks immediately. Boy, sometimes it takes a while to even realize that a disparaging or an offensive remark has been made, because you're not expecting it, and it kind of goes like this, and you sort of have to regroup, and that's okay, but as soon as you have regrouped, deal with it. And in the most non-punitive and objective way you can, and that's why the rules are so important. We have decided that this kind of conversation is not appropriate in this venue, directly and immediately. Allow students to lead discussions. Willie talked about that, if it's appropriate for the course and the students involved. Our role as instructors when we're leading discussion is always to negotiate between empowering the students and making sure they're getting what they need to get from the class. We can't just let them, go off the rails and start. I teach a lot of close reading of text, and sometimes there's just a blatant misread that's not going to lead to any good conclusion. And I got to pull it back. So you're always going to have to be that judge. You're always going to have to negotiate that. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Find ways to synthesize comments and encourage your students to do the same. I think that's really important. When you can say, Marie, I see that you're building upon John's point, and this is what I get from that. Is that right? Is that where you're trying to go? She might say yes, she might say no. Model that for them. It helps them, and it helps them be able to do it themselves. Do you want to talk about the online discussions, and then we'll conclude and open it up for questions?
Oh, I think we're actually faster than we thought.
Yeah, we're really good. No, I mean, go back. There's online.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
We're sneaky. We did plan this. So be responsive. So we mentioned the time, it's going to take some time in the beginning, certainly as your course starts, to be responsive and don't leave them hanging. So that's where in the beginning you're really, and you're going to watch these discussions all semester, all session, but especially in the beginning. Be socially present. They have to know you're actually in the class if you're doing online discussion. So you've got to, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to answer every student's post, but you might answer 5 students' posts that you see similarities among 5 people's. So you could say, well, I see these people saying this, and they know you've read it, you're in the group. And again, as Karen said, deal quickly with inappropriate messages. And we've talked about the clear set of directions and expectations, but in an online class or hybrid, as you all know who teach it, the deadlines are more important, the directions have to be clearer, an accountability and a monitoring system. You may have a rubric for grading the discussions. If you have help, dream on, right? If you have a TA, then you might have a pretty detailed rubric for the discussion for what you want, either for each discussion or across the board. I've got to be honest, right now I have a pretty simple one. I can if they post, okay, they get a point. I can tell that they've read and it's very thoughtful. It may be just a 2-pointer, but that's if I don't have any help. I'd like to do better sometimes, but you've got to be sure that they know how they're being graded. And that's kind of what we would do in a face-to-face, but it's a little bit tougher in an online setting, because what works in a direction to 200 people face-to-face where they can ask questions, you'll see the 50 emails if you haven't been clear in your directions. So we wanted to mention to you that, again, feel free to contact us or any of the other Provost Teaching Fellows who are here or at the sites. And this is our email address. We also have your email addresses here. I guess we could send the slides.
Yeah, would you like to send the slides?
You don't have to ask. But if you have other questions for any of the teaching fellows, definitely feel free to contact us.
Really quickly, with the slides, could you send us a sample of what you have for rules and instructions? That would be really helpful.
Sure. Sure. Okay. So go ahead, Deb.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on something that you said that I thought was incredibly important, and that's the privacy of the classroom, because that applies to you as well. You have to assume every student is coming in there with a smartphone. Anybody can record anything and post it anywhere. Now, we do have guidelines about the expectations for students to have positive learning experiences, and if they're worried that what they say is going to be posted, obviously that gets in the way. It can also come back to bite you, because we all know that somebody can be recorded out of context, and then have it posted and have problems. So, we do have guidelines about it, but I would strongly advise people to include a statement in their syllabi. And I just found one that I used last semester, and it's referring to the fact that this is a course with sensitive material, and I want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable talking within the boundaries of respect and courtesy. And then it says, to that end, any recording of class sessions is prohibited with the exception, and this is an important one, of those who may need ADA accommodation, and no one should post any verbatim accounts of class discussions or say anything that could identify a class member on social media. And I just think it's really important to include that, because that means if you do have somebody in the class who violates it, they can be brought up on misconduct. And that can help stifle any kind of intimidation from any direction to class discussion for both students and faculty. So you referred to it, and I just wanted to follow up because I think it's really important.
That's fantastic. And Deb, if you could send that to Karen, and I will include that in that little
that statement?
that statement from
Sure.
Deb, and we'll attribute it to Deb. At the sites, could you hear Deb's point? With our mics in the room, we think you can, but let us know if you can. Did you hear that? I see a wave. I think that's okay. So we did want to give a few minutes for general Q&A, and that can be from any site for us. And we're thinking maybe 5 minutes, and then we're going to cut the video off and have a true discussion in each of our sites. There are teaching fellows, facilitators at each site. So any general questions from the site?
If you have a question.
Sure. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Anybody have any questions at this time?
Any questions from any site, including here?
Yes, from downtown.
Downtown, okay.
Hi, it's Bobby.
Hi, Bobby.
So I have a question because I have a number of international students in my class, and
The microphone's right there in front of you.
over here. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I have a question because I have international students in my class whose first language may have a pragmatic system that indicates that if they are interested in a topic, they are supposed to interrupt other people when they're talking, and how that might be handled or maybe discussed ahead of time. Because what we've asked here is to let people stop, talk and then start, but to express interest in some cultures, you're supposed to interrupt. So it would be interesting to see how we would handle that.
Well, I think the first way you handle it is when you set up the ground rules, and I think you can be kind and inclusive when if you decide to say, in this forum, interrupting doesn't get us where we want to go, so we're going to ask that you not interrupt, or perhaps you think that a more freewheeling conversation is going to serve the students well, in which case you can say, if you want to interrupt, please indicate, by a hand signal, or don't interrupt mid-sentence, wait till somebody finishes their sentence. It's a great question because we're dealing with people who come from a variety of cultures with a variety of norms, and that's why it's all the more important to set the expectations and have the students have a say in what those expectations should be. Anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, related to this, or? Yeah. Okay, yeah, here.
I work in the language department as well, and I think it's really important to open it up and kind of change the way we do things, because it also increases people's cultural awareness. And so sometimes it's okay maybe for 1 or 2 forums, or even for the entire class, to challenge people to think outside the box. Because not only are you allowing those students to share their culture with the majority of our students, but you are, once again, increasing that cultural knowledge. So it becomes kind of like you get away from that middleness point of view where it's kind of like, we're all the same, and then kind of getting people to understand a little bit more about that we are not exactly all the same. So I think that there's kind of a double-edged sword. And so I think it's important to open that up sometimes and kind of let that student also feel included in the discussion.
One of the things I was going to suggest, my background is an occupational therapist, so we're all about function and modification and meeting people's needs. A way to be inclusive could be like if that person wants to interrupt, and that's how they do this socially, don't necessarily take it completely away, but give them another venue. Like, rather than stop that person from speaking so we can keep the conversation going, jot down some of the things you want to say so you don't lose your train of thought. Because an approach like that might show respect because the interruption serves a purpose. You know, it makes things addressed immediately, so it's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's one possible way to control it. And I was also going to say what he said, you might want to mix it up. Let's try one way, so the students, after they try several different formats, can decide what works for them. Just some thoughts.
Yeah, no, I have my own thoughts, of course, and they go along mostly with what has been said, but I think it's kind of the teachable moment type of thing, so that you, you know, in Spanish and French and a lot, you know, conversations, you tell them if you're interested, you know, this is how you interrupt, you know, you don't do it rudely, but you might do something like this. But if you're in a large class, you know, you might just say, acknowledging, even in the syllabus, you know, people from different cultures may have different, are used to different ways of interacting, but in this class we're going to have each group create their ground rules and, you know, see and take it from there. But I think respect is the most important element of all of this. So, any other?
We are going to say goodbye to the other campuses, but one thing I wanted to say to everybody, which is something we've all talked about and we all know, none of the things we've said work all the time, and sometimes nothing works. So the best thing you can do is have a bag of tricks. You know, I mean, don't get locked into one way of doing it because it'll work beautifully for one class and it will tank in the other. So diversify.
Okay, one tip from Tomiko about that.
Oh, Tomiko, yeah, you had some great...
We actually, as teaching fellows, we learn a lot from all of you also. We had a fun discussion in the last couple of days, and Tomiko has what to do when there are crickets and nobody says anything. Do you want to add a tip or two? Because I think they'll be able to hear well.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't teach one of your lecture classes, but I've taught seminar classes too. And the worst thing is when you ask an open-ended question and then they're just staring at you, right? And it's dead silent. I love that. Well, just wait them out. But I find that actually makes things much, much worse because then no one's going to say anything, right? So I found that the students that don't say anything fall into roughly 3 categories. They don't know what to say. They know what to say, but they're afraid that they're going to look stupid in front of the instructor or the other students, or they really just don't care. And, you know, so when I think about how to encourage discussion, I keep all of these things in mind. And how can I remove those barriers? And so the first one is, well, what if they don't have something to say? And so one of the things you can do is you can have them write down their, you know, you put out a question and then have them write down what they think the answer is. So that gives them a little bit of time to ruminate. They have something. My expectation is they have something written down. Also, a little trick is if they look like deer in the headlights, is don't give them an open-ended question. Is you give them a question and you give them 3 possible answers to select from. So they know, well, I got a 1 in 3 shot of getting this right, so I'm going to pick out one of those. Then it's the, well, how do you reduce the fear of looking stupid? Like, you know, I find in seminar classes in particular, students who don't say anything for the first 2 or 3 classes, they become mute because the pressure becomes intense on them. They realize, I haven't said anything, so when I say something, like the whole class goes, they all stare at that person like, whatever you're going to say, it's going to be really profound, so we're going to listen to you. So they don't say anything. So if you can get them to start talking and realizing, even if they're not quite right, it's okay. So with the questions or the answers that they have written down, one of the ways to get around that looking stupid is I have them, like I collect them, and then I randomly sort them back out to the students, and I say, okay, I'm going to pick on some of you. You read what's on the card, and you tell me whether or not you agree with that and why. So it takes the onus off of them. They have whatever was given to them, and then they can say, well, I didn't really think that that was right because, you know, I thought X, Y, Z. So it gives them something to talk about. It takes some of the pressure off of them. And the only other thing I'll say is and this took years of getting good at acting, is if somebody answers a question and it's completely off the wall, is you can't be negative, because if you give that kind of punishment, then no students won't want to answer anything. So you have to get good at saying, well, that's an interesting perspective that I had not thought of before. I have these like little bags of things that can, well, not exactly, that's related to what we were talking about, but perhaps, and sort of, redirecting them. But having a way of reaffirming, yes, it's a good thing that you said something, and it wasn't quite right, but it was still a good thing to say, I think is important.
Thank you so much.
You did farewell to the other.
We're going to bid farewell, says Karen, to the rest of the group. Bye.